Blessed ones, your own individual mighty I Am presence, even now, and certainly as that presence draws home the unascended expression of itself in the victory of the ascension, every ascended being, just as every individualized mighty I Am presence, is in fact the son or daughter of God. Not only a son or daughter, not only many sons and many daughters, but in fact, every ascended presence has the sense of being the firstborn and of being the only begotten, because each is begotten of the God flame, the only begotten. If you can elevate your heart so as to appreciate that there is this exchange that is eternally transpiring between your own blessed presence and the great I Am. In this example, that great I Am is the parent or father, if you will, to the Son, which is the mighty I Am presence. In that spirit, there is a familial sense of utmost belonging and of the most intimate communion, such that between the shores of the being, of the individuality, of the Son of God, the mighty I Am presence, individualized, and the fatherhood, the father-motherhood of God in the great I Am, there is no duality or separation, but there is instead love, the sense of sharing, the sense of belonging, the sense of communion, the ennobling of the mighty I Am presence, because it is the firstborn of the great I Am. In times past, there was a practice of primogeniture in which the firstborn sons inherited all that the parent had accumulated. And this is true for each and every I Am presence, yours included. And when the ascension takes place, that is when that inheritance is bestowed. Prior to that time, it is promised. It is there in trust on behalf of the one destined to ascend. And when that ascension takes place, there is entrusted into the beloved all that the divine parent has. And each ascended master then has the sense that all of the great central sun and all of the realms of creation are the inheritance that has been lavished upon that one by the glorious presence. This is the godly estate that each and every one of you have to look forward to when the present moment catches up to that future moment when the last trump sounds and the ascension takes place. Even now, Your own beloved mighty I Am presence is that only begotten firstborn of the great God flame and of the great I Am. And you are encouraged to study the face of that firstborn, the lines of character that are etched there, the calm demeanor, to have the sense, as is true, that this presence is not a citizen of this present age, the 21st century, or of any earthly epoch of time whatsoever. That this presence stands in those moments of eternity that never cease to beat forth in the timeless, changeless eternity of that God identity. For you to reunite with your presence, you are not to become the product of your era. Whether you came of age in the roaring 20s or the period of the 60s, the flower children of the 60s, whatever might be the adjectives for each of those generations in between, the 60s and the present time. So what if you came of age in any one of those decades? What is that to you? For you are not of this world. Your presence is not of this world. And if you suffer yourself to be made over after the image of the times in which you live, if you close your eyes and leap into the void of the common lot of humanity, you will not be identifying with the timeless, spaceless, changeless, steadfast nature of that glorious being whom you are. In your mighty I Am presence, and you will never arrive at that moment when your destiny is achieved through the victory of the ascension. In fact, there is, in some respects, quite little that separates the ascended master from the unascended mighty I Am presence at that level of reality. Only when the heart flame of that presence encounters the frailties of the four lower bodies must the judicious discrimination of the Christ presence temper the power of the presence that can otherwise come through. This evening marks the final time in which we will rejoice in that vision of the ascended presence as the goal of life for us as well as for all mankind. Following this, we will roll up our sleeves and look dispassionately on what has held us back in this outer world of form from experiencing all that our beloved mighty I Am presence is at inner levels. In our time leading up to the beginning of this conclave, we pointed out that we would be associating the virtues of the Christ as a backdrop for the steep path to Christhood, because they, along with other attributes of the presence, when put into the context of day-to-day life, explain the path that we are to embrace. For example, if you take up the quality, the divine virtue of responsibility, it is one of those attributes that translates into a very real expression of the path. Human nature, first we will discuss the divine quality of responsibility. As the Master has explained, when a presence elects to step forth and focus, a permanent focus of individuality, that presence is thereafter the recipient of the light, life, and love currents from the One and the Good, and will be necessarily qualifying that life as it goes forth for creative purposes. And all who do so then must shoulder the responsibility for their use of life. They have to literally accept the fact that the life and light that they send forth into creation is going to come back to them. Likewise, they accept the self-reliance, taking responsibility for their own well-being and not looking to outside assistance to help them in ways that they can and should be doing for themselves. In addition, the other attribute of this virtue of responsibility is, having received all that they are from the great I Am, these individualizations raise their hand and volunteer to freely and lovingly take responsibility for all of life in the realms of becoming, voluntarily shouldering upon themselves the yoke of caring for, not only in our case, the mankind of earth, but even in those perfect realms and perfect worlds, still there is always the doting love of that which is individualized that needs to be poured forth to minister to every other part of life which is not individualized, that needs direction, that needs care and nurturing and shepherding on its pathway. So this is one of the hallmarks of an ascended being, that they, of their own heart flame, willingly and gladly take this responsibility upon themselves. This is unquestionably one of the most exalted of the character traits of each and every ascended master, and it is a trait of the Christ presence and mighty I Am presence of an unascended life stream. It means that these presences care more for every other part of life than they do for themselves. And it sends them on their life's work of service to the mankind of earth. This is, of course, not a job that is quite ever completed. Are the generations in this world so well off today that all of us can wash our hands of our responsibilities, bidding good luck to mankind and saying, you're on your own now. Happy trails to you until we meet again, and simply pursue our own self-centered interests? No. This virtue of responsibility means that it is a yoke, a burden of light that the sons of God and the daughters of God willingly and freely, out of the great infinite love of their presence, take as a responsibility to do whatever they are able to do to render service for and on behalf of mankind. I might add as a codicil to that first and foremost, each one takes responsibility for themselves. And while there is much made of the divine ideal of charity, it is also many times distorted as a rationalization for why the vast majority of the human race should be absolved of doing all that is within their own capability for and on behalf, first and foremost, of their own life streams, as well as for other parts of life. It seems to be the wisdom of the age that people are too weak, too much in need and incapacity, that they must be taken care of in 1,001 different ways. If you read carefully the instruction of one of the most loving of beings, beloved Nada of the Ruby Ray, our beloved Chohan of the Sixth Ray, and the member of the Karmic Board herself, she pointed out decades ago, when this work began in earnest, that the Ascended Masters look to what is best for the mighty I Am presence, as that presence is seeking to express through the heart flame. But the Ascended Masters have not and are not concerned with the performance of outer physical acts for the palliative, temporary assistance to the outer rebellious selves of mankind that refuse to take responsibility even for their own life streams, much less for one another. She describes this as slavery to human creation and a vain treadmill that has no end in and of itself. So responsibility in that regard is one of the hallmarks of each and every Ascended Master, and it is one of the doorways through which those who would achieve the ascension must pass, shouldering wherever possible their own accountability to do that which is within their ability, within their capacity. Not everyone has the same talents, has the same abilities. But whatever those talents are, as you might recall in Jesus' very famous parable on that subject, everyone will be called to account for how they used, abused, or neglected the talents that God had entrusted into their keeping. In addition to this quality of responsibility, which all the Ascended Masters have, there is this next twin, if you will, to responsibility, which is called at various times the virtue of divine authority, hierarchy, and obedience. Because authority and obedience are like the heads and tails side of the same coin of hierarchy. What is being taught in this second Christ virtue is the fact that despite all of the multiplicity of life out here, despite all of the apparent separation and or disconnectedness of things that are out here in life, in fact, there is the mystic rose that is the cosmos. And the heart of that rose is the great central sun. And the heart of the great central sun is the one and the good that shines its light into the great central sun and from thence out into all of creation. And essentially, regardless of the diversity that there is in life, regardless of the multiplicity that there is, beneath it all, behind it all, there is a profound and utter oneness, which explains how God can be everywhere present, everywhere all-knowing, and everywhere all-powerful, because there is this profound oneness, which means that regardless of what part of life where the focus is, one is still an integrated part of that greater oneness that the presence is. And there is this hierarchical stepping down of light and power and differentiation from the great central sun and from the one. But nonetheless, there is this Buddhic sense of a greater all-enfolding oneness. And in this case, it happens to be the function of the individualizations of God to be the part of reality that is whose role it is to direct the universal parts of that same reality. And that direction can only occur where there is an individualization of the Godhead, which is able to conceive its own self-spontaneous thought and will and love. And so authority in that sense is the functioning of that ray of that virtue of directing intelligence, whose role it is in all cases to issue the conscious, cosmic, Christ command to the universal aspects of the Godhead so that they will be able to fulfill their reason for being as well. They are, the great sea of universal light is waiting for that command. Elemental life is waiting for that command. The elements and the life forces within your own four lower bodies are awaiting that command. As true as that is, and every bit of it is absolutely letter true, nevertheless, each individualization is itself an individualization of the one. And so to that one, to that God of very gods, each individualization owes its allegiance, owes its obedience and surrender and love to the presence that continues to give it life. So everywhere, up and down the whole golden Buddhic web of life that reaches from the heart of the great central sun to the outermost reaches of the earth element, there is always this two-sided coin of but not only giving and receiving, but also commanding and obeying. And so the sons and daughters of God, the ascended masters, have no compunction about aligning themselves with that role of hierarchy in the universe. I might point out to you at this point, and we'll deal more with this in the subsequent days, that the thing that distinguishes the fallen potential of the human identity is that at its core, the nature of that human self is that that human self is in defiance and rebellion against its own God presence. And for that human self, the concept of hierarchy is anathema. It causes the teeth to gnash, the solar plexus to squirm, the irritation like scarlet flares to flare out of the emotional world. It causes the fingernails to come down the blackboard. Use your own analogy, but in all cases, the very definition of the human ego is that it is in empathy, in enmity with the presence of God. It is in basically a life and death struggle with that presence, knowing that if the presence is present, it cannot be present, or vice versa. So that explains sometimes why there is many times an instinctual shying away from the concept of hierarchy. Nevertheless, it is a part of the divine plan. There is one element of this second Christ virtue that in the ascended master presence is even more sublime than how it has been explained thus far. Because lo and behold, not only does the ascended presence lovingly obey the laws of life and give and bow the knee to the great I am, but lo and behold, it happens to be the case that the God of very gods has also said to the individualizations, "Command thou me, decree a thing, and it shall be done unto you." This is one of the most sublime and profound attributes that comes to each and every ascended being, that the love of God is so great, the givingness and the next virtue of self-sacrifice on the part of the one and the good is so great that when an ascended being gives a command, or when you are able to hold in consciousness that you are your mighty I am presence in action, and that your presence is speaking with you and through you in the process of giving the call, that God Almighty moves into action, and the whole of reality converges to be the fulfillment of that command. That is the supreme privilege of being an ascended being. Actually, you are already doing this to some degree, for better or for worse. But as a mercy of the law, only a certain metered quantity of the life of your own mighty I am presence is dispensed to your consciousness moment by moment. You only have so much to work with, so that you do not misqualify too much and cause destruction to yourself or to other parts of life. So you are learning and perfecting the process of divine qualification through your four lower bodies even now. And even now, the universe, the presence of God in the great sea of universal light, which is the body consciousness of the great I Am, is already obeying, because that is the universal expression of the Godhead, whose role and office it is to obey, just as your role is ultimately to command. In all of this, there is no sense of superiority or inferiority. There is no sense of a servility, such that as might have, and admittedly is many times present in human consciousness. There is no class consciousness, no slavery consciousness, no sense of belittlement whatsoever. In fact, in reality, because your presence is I and am and presence, it is always a sense that one part of your presence is speaking to the other part of that self-same presence. One part is commanding, one part is obeying. And it is necessary for that virtue of the second secret ray to be perfected here in this world of form. You've got to know that there are no life streams who are dragged, kicking and screaming, into the ascended state. You've got to know that no ascended master is ever going to come forth and point a finger at you and say, you will obey, you will assent, whether you like it or not. You will conform. That is never, ever, ever, ever going to happen. Because it would not make for an ascended being. Everyone who re-enters the realm of the ascended master octave re-enters gladly and willingly. And as you have a foretaste of the perfection, the harmony, and the order that reign, and the abundance and the magnificence that reigns throughout that realm, how it is so coordinated and how it all works with perfect organization, you will be joyful, you should be anyway, to leave behind the chaos, the disorder, the cacophony of this realm, with all of its surging of mortal consciousness, and be back home where everything, yes, there's freedom, yes, there's abundance, but there is cosmos, there is order, there is harmony, in harmonia there in that realm. Nobody's forced to do that. So that's why we must learn that lesson and perfect that virtue in ourselves, as it is already a Christ virtue. As is always the case, the ascended masters and your mighty I Am presence first achieves that perfection of character and in this moral, spiritual realm. And only when those character traits of the Christ virtues are fully seated in consciousness, then come the corresponding life currents that are supernatural in nature, if you wish, that then go forth in fulfillment of that Christ virtue. The next of these is the quality of sacrifice. It is that quality closest to God's heart. It is that utter givingness of all that one is to the beloved, whomever that beloved might be. The greatest gift of self-sacrifice is, in fact, when the one and the good bestows all that it is in that individualization and holds in mind the pattern of perfection of each one of the individualizations forever and forever and forever, having the joy and the work, because work is the true work that is service, not toil, is also a joy of unraveling from the heart flame of that presence, from the self-sacrificing givingness of that love, more and more and more of that which is within the one. So sacrifice too is and a virtue of the God presence. Too much could never be taught or said about the nature of that consummation of all of the qualities. One of the ways in which Jesus tried to prepare his disciples for his demonstration of that virtue is when he explained how if a kernel of wheat or corn refuses to die, it remains alone. But if it self-sacrifices itself, gives of itself in a willing transformation, then that seed germinates and it produces a very great multiplication of its own nature. So in that act of givingness, there is not a loss, but there is an amplification and a multiplication. So this too is the nature of the God presence. Thanks to that quality of the exhaustless nature of the power and the limitless light of the presence, there is no quantification or diminishing of that which is within that one. And so you may understand that as far as it goes with that givingness of love, you can give of yourself and give and give and give. That is how you expand. And there will never really be a diminishing or an exhausting of the reservoir of that love. In fact, the more that you give, the more the chalice and the doorway of your heart expands, so that you are forever capable of giving more and more and more. And it just always goes on in that way. The next quality is that two-edged sword of necessity. Necessity is, amongst other things, one of the rays that relates to the universal, impersonal nature of the presence. It is the law of the being that the presence is. And there is no mitigation really or changing of that quality of necessity. It is the law of life, the impersonal law that governs the outpourings of light and life. And really, since your presence is the individualization of everything that God is, that includes the universal expression of the Godhead as the laws of nature, the laws of the universe, that are no respecter of anyone, whether they be an unascended life stream or even an ascended master or a cosmic being. They too respect and honor necessity. That law does not change. It cannot. It is the law of reality, the law of the one. In addition to that attribute of the presence as necessity, the other aspect of this is very directly related to the steep path of Christhood. Because in this world, one is always one of the principles of this law of necessity is that whatever is sent out as a creation must and shall inevitably and inexorably come back. It will come back, and it will be experienced by the one who sent it forth, come what may. No, there really can be no ultimate interference with that. It can be held in abeyance, and it can be superseded by transmutation when it comes back, but come back it will. As it relates to the steep path, necessity also is where those who are engaged in the cycles of initiation many times shrink back from the path. Everything is glorious in some of the earlier rays. There's the little roll that is sweet to the mouth. There are all of these divine ideals. But in this world, there does come the time when there seems to be a host of forces arrayed against the service that you have agreed to take up as you espoused responsibility, as you took authority, and as you sought to give voice and expression to the love of your heart. Necessity is when things get really very serious. And many times individuals, it is not only when that light goes out, but it is also when that light comes back in the return current back to the individual. And if what was sent out was discordant, of course, what is going to come back will be discordant as well. It is the ray in which the presence of God exerts a great compression upon life. It takes it from the ethereal and the universal and applies a very powerful compressing force to it, which many times is not the most comfortable of rays to have. In the sequence of initiations, this is when the son or daughter of God meets their Via Dolorosa. And the challenge for them is, will they have the cup pass from them, or will they go through? Will they stand? Will they face? And will they conquer those limitations that are placed upon them in their efforts to render service? It is not unusual many times for individuals to go through the cycles of initiation any number of times and come to this crux of necessity's ray and then shrink back from going through the eye of the needle at that point on the path, postponing till another cycle what is inevitable of going through that ray. What should occur when necessity comes about is that the third ray of sacrifice comes to one's rescue. The power of love from the heart defies rationality in the sense of defies outer intellectual logic. It is a pressure of the presence that is its own voice from the level of the presence. And if the life stream in that moment will remind themselves of that, those for whom they have taken responsibility, the mission that they have shouldered as responsibility, remind themselves that their mighty I Am presence and is capable of issuing the conscious cosmic Christ command. And they will experience that chrysalis of the heart flame, breaking the sepal shell of that, and in this ultimate act of the sacrifice of itself upon the altar, give itself to God on behalf of the beloved. As that ray of sacrifice comes forth, issuing to the heart of the mighty I Am Presence, using the pressure, the motivation of the compression of that initiation of necessity, it causes the life stream to transcend their humanity, because they have not shirked from the initiation. They cannot run away. They cannot abdicate. There's only one way to go, and that is through the eye of the needle. And the only resource left to them, there aren't a lot of outer world resources, because in that moment of necessity, all the props are, to their outer awareness at least, removed from their disposal. But what are they left with? They are left with the call and the light of their own mighty I Am Presence. And that is when if they are courageous enough to stand and face and invoke and invoke and invoke, they will actually transcend the mortality of the limited outer self and cause the outpouring from the God presence to come forth to meet the needs of that necessity, to meet the demands, and in the process produce the attainment of mastery, furnished by the light of the presence, because of the calls in that way. Think of it yourself. When all is going well, when you're sailing along, are you as keenly motivated to go to your altar and to give your decrees for all your worth as you are at those times of urgency when there is a real need? Certainly there are exceptions, but in most cases, those who have that pressure as an assistance and a goad will turn it to their advantage so that they are calling to that presence out of that necessity, and the presence is giving the answer to that call. Last but by no means least, you have the quality of constancy. Constancy, all of these, by the way, are attributes of your mighty I Am Presence in the heart of the great central sun, every single one of them. Constancy being one. You maybe recall the instruction that when you make an invocation, your Christ presence takes that to the heart of your own mighty I Am Presence, and in answer to that call, a ray, one or more rays of light go forth from the electronic body of the presence, and they zero in either into the mental, the emotional, or the physical plane, wherever that service is needed. And that ray will continue to pour and pour and pour and pour, however long it is necessary, in order to have 100% of the answer to that call produced in the realm of manifestation. The amount of energy and the length of time from the standpoint of the outer consciousness is immaterial to the presence. Why? Because the presence is beyond time or space. It's in eternity. So one length of time is as short or as long as another to the presence. And you are actually, as you practice your own constancy in the things that you have undertaken as the responsibilities of your mighty I Am Presence and your service to life, as you practice that, you are gaining momentum, which eventually, when you rise up in the resurrection and the ascension become the eternality and the constancy of your God presence as well. The fifth secret ray is not only this constancy that never fails, that never gives up, that never abdicates its role, but this fifth secret ray also includes practicality, productivity, and fruitfulness. Sometime, just to drive home to you the importance of that fruitfulness, we will do a quick run-through of the injunctions to various life streams as it relates to fruitfulness. For example, God spoke to Adam and Eve and said, "Be fruitful and multiply." God spoke to Abraham and said, "I am El Shaddai, be fruitful and multiply." Jesus said, "By your fruits ye shall know them." And his parable of the talents was to be an object lesson in the fact that every life stream is intended to be productive and to be fruitful. This fruitfulness is the culmination. You'll notice that it takes place in the earth current. It is the culmination of all of the outpourings. You're as low as you can go in the earth plane. You are as far out into reality as you can get in the earth plane. So fruitfulness is the consummation of the whole creative process. Fruitfulness is where that which is the one, that which is the good, has been taken by the individualizations of that allness that is the good. And each individualization has worked and worked over and refined and qualified and cultivated and separated and reunited and passed that good through and has produced goods and services, fruits on the tree of life. In one sense, with plant life, you can consider that the whole cycle of the plant, it begins with the blossom and culminates with the fruit. And many plants and trees and so forth, they commit so much of their vitality, and they put it all into that fruitfulness. So that too is an expression of this fifth secret ray that is the consummation of the whole process of the incarnation, is to render that fruitfulness and service to every part of life. Many life streams in the world do not care to exert themselves to be fruitful themselves. They'd rather be drones. Those that don't work, all they do is, in the bee culture, they just are consumers of the honey that other parts of the colony industriously go out and produce. As you make yourself useful to your mighty I Am presence, as you are divinely productive, not pandering to the appetites of the human consciousness, but serving the heart flames of mankind in whatever way your bliss calls you to, in whatever service it might be, as you find ways of being fruitful and productive, life will be sure to take care of you, and you will find that there is, coming back on necessity's ray, the return current of that self-same fruitfulness that enables you to be blessed in the life that you are to experience. You will have sent forth perfection and consummation of fruitfulness to life, And life must, of necessity, bring that back and lay it at your feet in the creative process. Now, we have focused mainly on those 5 elements of the 5 secret ray Christ virtues tonight as aspects of the Ascended Master presence. We've also focused on the belonging of each ascended presence to the great I Am and vice versa, of that mutuality which exists between them that is of such paramount importance. There is a host of other divine qualities that are native to each and every ascended being that you will have to look forward to when the round of your earthly incarnations is complete. Your mighty I Am presence has put itself forth into this world of form so that the heart flame that is that presence would be able to lay hold and appropriate the light of the 7 rays and the elements of that outpouring of light, that the heart flame would lay hold and appropriate the life currents, the currents of Akasha, of cosmic air, cosmic fire, water. These are liquid light currents that are the movers and the shakers in all of creation. All of this so that your heart flame and the presence could appropriate those, make them their own, master them, take dominion over them, express the Christ virtues through them, perfect them, and pour forth creativity and fruitfulness through them, and ultimately not relinquish that connection that it had so carefully forged, but in the final analysis, draw those things up into itself in the transfiguration, in the resurrection, and in the ascension. Everything that you are celebrating about your mighty I Am presence is truth and reality. If for your experience that is not your moment-to-moment experience, it is not because God is any less in your life stream than he is in any other life stream or in any of the ascended masters. Qualitatively, there is no distinction between the ascended masters, the cosmic beings, and your own life stream. It has to do with the handicaps put upon the heart flame and the recalcitrant momentums carried over from embodiment to embodiment through the vehicles of the memory body that are unfolded in each successive incarnation through the 4 lower bodies. So now that you have more of an idea about the reality of yourself, now that you have more of an idea of the pathway whereby you can reach that summit of the mountaintop of the ascended master status, now we are going to take up in earnest on the rest of this conclave the things that have held you back, some of which you have been aware of, but even those that you might actually have some awareness of, believe it or not, in most cases, they are sometimes so deceptively simple and things that have been there from the start of your study of the teachings that you have glossed over them. You have not factored in the long, far-reaching consequences of many of these qualities. You have a right to know what has held you back for so very long. You have a right to the championing of your heart flame by the ascended masters. You have a right to choose if you wish to embrace the life that leads to the ascension. If you decide that this very moment, this moment in the history of your life streams, many incarnations, that this is the moment when you are going to clasp your heart at one with your own mighty I Am presence, covenanting with that presence, covenanting with your ascended master sponsors, and leave this outer world behind in consciousness, in your attention and your attunement, and enter into the way of life that is lived by all the ascended masters, lived by your own beloved mighty I Am presence, the ascended master way of life, and embrace courageously and with inspiration the golden precepts that are the guidelines of that ascended master way of life. So that is we will turn the page now on the morrow and begin to examine once again the fetters and the handicaps that have for so very long caused the immortal victorious threefold flame on the altar of your heart of your four lower bodies to be thus far unable to take its rightful dominion over the four lower bodies. Thank you, and we look forward to that excursion. If I might be permitted one observation, as has been taught in the Temple of the Presence since the time of our conference on Manu Yuga, we are in an epoch for the earth known as Manu Yuga. It is the epoch of the Manus, of the root races. Especially the Manus act at the level of the presence. You are probably accustomed, those of you who are Ascended Master students of long standing, you're accustomed to Saint Germain coming in here with his swashbuckling, debonair atmosphere and just wowing you in your emotional body, wowing you in your mind with all of his flair and magnificence. You're used to the masters coming in and doing a lot of the work for you in your outer, lower vehicles. In this instance, as has been taught quite clearly before, and it's even been exhibited in the expression of these, the service of these Manus. Their service is to interact with your mighty I Am presence. That is the focus of their service. They give their momentum first and foremost to the presence, and then the presence translates to the Christ presence, the causal body, and the heart flame, and thence to the outer consciousness. So the more that you are able to still the four lower bodies and enter into that attunement with your own electronic body of your own mighty I Am presence, the more you will be the direct recipient of that supernal God consciousness that the Manus are bringing forth. After all, God is being reborn with every mighty I Am presence. God is being reborn as a new nova in the cosmos with every ascension that takes place. And so necessarily there will be that necessity ray of compression where the allness of the Godhead is concentrated at the level of that electronic body, and great God flame, and then dispensed to the outer self as it is able. So we welcome these Manus and the service that they are rendering to the starry bodies of the God presence and ourselves as well.